Hello everyone, this is another driving video in Chinese highways. So here I will show you how I travel from Hangzhou to Suzhou, but this is the continuation of the previous video. So now I'm already in the G1522, so I'm already close to Suzhou, which is already inside Jiangsu province. So during the video, I will make some comments about the traffic and the cars I find and the different problems I encounter, but because there are long periods without anything happening, I will also talk about car tech and automotive industry. So here we see the derivation to the G50, which is a perpendicular highway that goes to Shanghai, I think, if you take it to the right-hand side, so to the east. But we will continue to by the G1522, which is this two-lane highway, which is quite uncongested now because this is a working Saturday, close to midday. So now, because the traffic is quite clear, I would like to talk about a brand that I really like, and you may already know if you watch my previous videos. It's Alfa Romeo. I own an Alfa Romeo 147 and I was in love with that car. I will tell you a bit of the history of the brand without going too much back in history. But actually it's the brand that won the first F1 championship. This is already something remarkable that tells a lot about the philosophy of the brand. And you may know that a lot of jokes are told about this brand, like about the reliability of the cars. Like if you want to make a barbecue, you don't need to bring coal because if you have an Alfa Romeo, you just grill the meat in your engines, things like that. Well, this is nonsense nowadays. It's true that they had reliability problems back in the 80s. And then people start making jokes about that. And in addition, because it's an Italian brand, it's even more enjoyable. But the truth is, according to statistics, nowadays, Alfa Romeo cars are more reliable than German cars. That's just statistics. So the problem with Alfa Romeo cars is that generally they are a bit more expensive to maintain because of the slightly more sportive philosophy. They need shorter intervals of timing belt changes, shorter intervals of brake changes, etc. So that's what makes them slightly more expensive to maintain compared to other brands, and some owners don't want to assume it. Some owners just think that it will be okay to change the oil in the same intervals as a regular BMW, and then they encounter problems at a quite low mileage. So that's not the problem of the car, it's a problem that you are not following the indication of the manufacturer. But apart from that, maintaining it properly, those cars are extremely reliable. So I'm not sure about if talking about my Alfa Romeo 147 or about the Giulia Quadrifoglio. Yeah, I will talk about a bit about the history of Alfa Romeo during the last 20 years. So it seems that Alfa Romeo is in a cyclic history of almost bankruptcy. So every 10 years or so, they get in a very critical economical situation or financial situation in which they almost run out of money and they have a lot of debt, interest to pay, etc. So the brand has almost disappeared like 3 times in the last 30 years. The last one, not the last one, the last one, so the second last one was at the end of the 90s. Because of the bad reputation, maybe sales were not great. They started increasing the debt of the brand, which was part of the Fiat Group. I'm not sure it was already part of the Fiat Group at that time. I will assume yes, but now it's a part of the Fiat Group. And what they did is to launch it was like a final hope. They launched a project which was the car that was going to save the brand. This car was the Alfa Romeo 147. This car not only saved the brand, but it skyrocketed the brand because it became the car of the year in 2003 in Europe. So it was really an excellent design. It had a very good acceptance in the public. The sales were great. And the car was sold for many years because the concept of the car was so innovative and so well studied that it was a total success. So I will tell a few features of this car. First of all, this is a small car, okay? It's a brake or a coupe, so it doesn't have the trunk coming out. And I think the length is about 4 meter 25 centimeter. So it's a slightly small car. And if you have seen some in the road, you may have noticed that the hood or the nose of the car is extremely low. So it's a bit difficult to understand why it's so low. If the engine displacement is similar to other cars, why it has so small nose? Well, it doesn't have anything to do with the engine actually. It has to do with the front suspension concept or geometry. It doesn't have the classical MacPherson that you find in most of sedans or coupes nowadays. It has a double wishbone suspension, which allows for a much lower hood or much lower nose of the car. Fitting the engine is not a problem. The engine is not the main requirement of space for the height of the nose of a car. So this car was offered with different engines. The version I got was the 1.6 liters atmospheric, of course. I'm not sure, but I think they didn't produce it with any turbo. So it was an 1.6, which was sold in two versions, one with variable admission and the other one with constant admission. I had the variable admission, which was rated at a power of 120 horsepower. And the one without variable admission, which was exactly the same engine but without variable admission, had 105 horsepower. This engine had a particular characteristic which makes it different from most of engines we see nowadays. Actually, there are several characteristics, but I will start by the geometry of the cylinders. There is a ratio, which is the bore-stroke ratio, which means, wow, did you see that, Mercedes? So there is a ratio which is the bore divided by the stroke. So the bore is the diameter of the cylinders. The stroke is the displacement in length between the top and the bottom path of the cylinder. So in most of the cars, this ratio is slightly below 1. It means the travel of the cylinder, the movement, is a bit higher than the diameter. This allows to make cars slightly more thermally efficient. But the counterpart of this is having longer cylinders means that you have higher speeds of movement of the cylinder, so it creates higher inertias. It means you are limited in the revs of the engine. You cannot rev it very high because you will start wearing the walls and the different moving parts of the crankshaft and the cylinder and the piston and the sealing rings. So that's why Alfa Romeo adopted this bore to stroke ratio a bit higher than 1. So it means the cylinder is wider. The diameter is wider than the path that the cylinder goes through in a cycle. So this allows to rev this engine slightly higher. So instead of having the maximum power at around 5,000 RPMs, this engine was rated at maximum power around 6,500, so 6,500 RPMs. This allows, with the same displacement, to have maybe 20% more of power, which is very interesting because you are getting a smaller engine, less weight, and more power. Next feature that you get in this engine is that, and actually this gives names to the model, to the car model, which is a Alfa Romeo 147 t.spark. It contains 2 spark plugs per cylinder. So one is the classic spark plug that is situated in the center of the cylinder, and this ignites at the normal timing that it would ignite in any engine. And there is an extra spark plug in the corner of the cylinder. This spark plug ignites before the main one, and this allows a more homogeneous and maximizes the burn up of the fuel inside the combustion chamber. This allows actually to change the timing in a way that the car has much more torque in low RPMs. So this car is really amazing. I would say, I don't remember, but I think I never stole it. Even when I was not yet familiar with the clutch, I never stole the car in a start or in a slope anywhere, because it really had so much torque at low RPMs. It felt like a diesel. Really, it felt like I was driving a 2.0 TDI, because you could release the clutch quite carelessly, and the car was not stalling. Incredible. So that's a nice feature. Then there is the variable admission, which gives higher power. Okay, you have the ideal torque curve, which is optimized for a RPM range. Let's say this car was optimized for 3000 RPMs. So it means all the timing of the valves and the timing belt is made to optimize the engine at 3000 RPMs. Then the second spark plug allows you to have higher power or torque at lower RPM, so below 3000 and down to 1000. And then the variable admission allowed you to increase the torque above 3000 and up to the maximum power at 6 or 7000 RPMs. So this made a very small package engine, atmospheric, so no need of turbos, of complications that reduce reliability. You can rev it very high because of this bore-stroke ratio, and it was really lovely to use because it was so linear that you could not feel any unsmooth part in the torque curve. I tried the maximum speed of the car once in the German Autobahn, and it felt so reliable up to 6500 RPMs. It was delightful. And you will find some videos on YouTube like this kind of list people do, like the best 4-cylinder engines of the last 20 years. This engine is always in the lists of the best gasoline or the best 4-cylinder engines or the best less than 2000 cubic centimeter engines. And the noise, the exhaust note was also quite delightful. Okay, so I could still talk a bit more about the engine, but I think it's you got the point. That was a really nice design. Front suspension, etc. And the only downfall of this car was the security. In the Euro NCAP frontal crash test, they didn't score very well. I think they only scored 3 stars out of 5. So for nowadays standards, this is unacceptable. But back in 2003, I mean, it was not that bad. Of course, there were cars already with 5 stars, like Volvos and so on. But I mean, 3 stars was not like driving a coffin yet. Nowadays, a 3-star NCAP is driving a coffin. So Alfa Romeo actually reinforced the structure, the chassis, after getting 3 stars in the Euro NCAP. And according to them, after the reinforcement, they added some steel bars in the front of the car. According to them, if they try to repass the Euro NCAP test, they could have scored higher, like 4 or 5 stars. But they did not do the test again. So the best Euro NCAP they got is 3 stars, even if they updated the chassis with some extra reinforcement bars. So I don't know what's the actual rating of the actual car. So basically this was the car, and this saved Alfa Romeo because it was a big success. And needless to say, the interiors were sublime. You don't see this anymore in any brand. You can even go to Rolls-Royce, like if you can see some in some museum or something. The finishing detail of Alfa Romeos is just superior. The leather they use, the stitching, the plastics, everything looks so in place that it cannot be defeated by virtually anyone. I'm serious about that. It's in that aspect you can feel they are Italian. And then the brand was quite good financially. They kept selling this model, and the extra money that entered allowed them to develop newer models, and so they continued operating quite normally for a few years, but not for too long, because around 10 years later they were again close to bankruptcy. So at this moment, the responsibles of Alfa Romeo, and I think that this coincided with the financial crisis of 2008, more or less, and the post-crisis consequences. Italy and all the south of Europe was in a very bad financial state, so this kind of national, well, they are not national brands, they are private, but it's a very important part of the Italian industry. So at that moment, they could not get any help from the government because the government was also in a very serious economical condition. So in this context, the responsibles of Alfa Romeo at the moment went to the chief executive of the Fiat Group, because Alfa Romeo is part of the Fiat Group, which at that time was Sergio Marchionne, who is not between us anymore. And they asked, look, it's Alfa Romeo, we need to save this brand, we just need a bit of liquidity injection and we will do something new like we did with the 147. And what Sergio Marchionne did was, I think it was a genius idea. They said, you can have all the Ferrari team, like all the engineers and designers, it's for you and also the facilities to design a car. So they are giving the best asset of the Fiat Group, which is Ferrari, for Alfa Romeo to develop a car. This is crazy. This was like a balloon of, not a balloon of oxygen. This was like giving all the oxygen of the atmosphere to Alfa Romeo at that moment. By the way, for the people who doesn't know, the Fiat Group contains Fiat, Lancia, Abarth, Ferrari, Alfa Romeo, and Maserati, and some American brands. Okay, I will mention the American brands also. Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and RAM. So what they did, because they had the Ferrari team of engineers and designers for 3 years. 3 years is actually a very short time to design a car, but if you really work hard, you can do pretty much all the job. So what they did is to design the Alfa Romeo Giulia Quadrifoglio. So it's not the standard Giulia, it's like a Giulia in hormones, right? It's I think it's rated at 490 horsepower, the resulting car. And basically that car is a 90% Ferrari, even if it's branded Alfa Romeo. And I think there are only 2 times in the history when Ferrari put one of their engines in another car. So one is this, it's the Alfa Romeo Giulia Quadrifoglio. And the other one was back in the 80s when there was the big group in the rally. I think there was the Lancia Stratos that was designed by Ferrari. And that Lancia contained a V6 engine developed by Ferrari. So it was branded Ferrari inside the Lancia. I think this was the single only time in the history that Ferrari sold an engine to a third party. It's not exactly the same in the Alfa Romeo Giulia Quadrifoglio because it's not branded Ferrari, it's branded Alfa Romeo, but actually it is a Ferrari. I think they took, I'm not really sure about that, but I think they took the engine of the Ferrari 360 Modena, which is an V8, and they removed 2 cylinders, so it becomes a V6, but basically it's the same base engine, and they added a turbo to boost the power up to 490 horsepower. And all the design of the car, like virtually all, suspensions, transmission, chassis, exhaust, everything, it was made by the Ferrari group. So this is a Ferrari in a 70 or 80% of its construction that has the cost of, 20% of a Ferrari. It's a really amazing car, and here I will skip a bit to avoid showing you my plate number in the toll. So here I'm going out from the highway, from the G1525, and I'm entering Suzhou. So I'm in the city now. So this is a bit the history of the 2 cases where the design of an extraordinary car saved Alfa Romeo from bankruptcy. Of course, I didn't finish the history, but with the Alfa Romeo Quadrifoglio, the Giulia and the Giulia Quadrifoglio, the sales of this car saved the brand again, and they got some oxygen to at least financially, to continue operating some more years, hopefully for many more. I really don't want this brand to have any economical problems because I really like this brand. So here I'm waiting for the red light, then we will turn left and we will continue below the elevated road, like 1, 2 or 3 traffic lights, and then we will cross the lake with a tunnel below the lake. This is quite nice, so I will wait until then. I want to show you the tunnel below the lake. You see to the left-hand side the elevated road, so we'll be all the time below this road now for 2 traffic lights, and then we will accelerate through the ramp to join this elevated road.
Continue straight at the traffic light. Use the second lane from left.
I remember in some urbanism class in the university, but I'm talking about more than 15 years ago, some professor really criticized this kind of architecture or engineering in which you have these elevated roads, because he said when you go below this and you look up, the view is really horrible. Like this concrete slab, it's like the end of the world. It's the most unbeautiful thing you can have. But in my opinion, I don't see the problem. I mean, if it's well designed, I see that there are some drains. If you look at the left-hand side of the slab, the columns look good with rounded edges, quite stylish. Some more drains coming out from along with the columns. And when it's raining, it's nice because you don't get water when you are below the elevated road. So I don't really know what's the proposal of my former professor about this kind of city architecture. It also decongests a lot the traffic in this part of the city. These traffic lights are quite long. By the way, the configuration of the Alfa Romeo Giulia or the Giulia Quadrifoglio, it's a front engine, so it's the V6 originally from Ferrari in the Quadrifoglio, or a 4-in-line for the Giulia, I think. And it's a rear-wheel drive, so it has a shaft that goes to the rear of the car, and the gearbox is associated to a park converter. So this is the same as a BMW's. It's not like a dual clutch that I'm driving now in this car here. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, some brands go with dual clutches, some brands go with park converters. It seems that most high-performance applications are going for the dual clutches recently, like Porsche, Ferraris, McLarens, etc. But it seems some cars, even in the higher rated power units, they still opt for the park converters. So yeah, it's a different technological solution. And here, when this traffic light gets green, we'll accelerate to the ramp and join the road that will lead us to the tunnel below the lake. And at the exit of the lake, I will end the video because this will be close to my destination. Okay, here I have freeway, throttle, 80 km/h speed limit, throttle here in the ramp. I really like to be the first to join the main road because there is an attitude which I don't like here in China, is that in the acceleration ramps or acceleration like here, acceleration lanes, people brakes. So for them, acceleration lanes are de-acceleration lanes. which is very dangerous because let's say you are approaching the main road at 60, but the main road people is circulating at 80. If you're at 60 and you brake, you will join the main road at 50 or 40, which makes it more dangerous, and in case of accident the difference of speed between cars is higher and you get a higher impact. So that's why I always try to overtake everyone and just go along to the acceleration lane. And here we have some bridge over the lake, and in around 500 meters we'll get below the lake. Here in Suzhou there is this famous building which looks like a trousers, pants, jeans. So it's like twin towers, but they are joined at the top. So like the top is the waist, and then there are the two legs, which is quite amazing. I'm not sure we can see this building now if you look at the right hand side. No, I didn't see it. Maybe it was, if you see it from the profile you don't really see anything special. And in front of us we have a Volkswagen Santana. This car is really a museum piece. It seems that back in the 90s in China this car was very popular, mainly among wealthy people. Maybe not all the families had cars back in the 90s. Now cars are very popular. Most of people can afford a car. But back in the 90s not many people could, and the people who could usually went for this model of Volkswagen Santana, which was already a bit expensive for the economy of the time. And you see that, I don't know if because of nostalgia or because they cannot afford a new one, many people are still driving these Volkswagen Santanas nowadays. And I find it quite nice. If you watch some Chinese movies, like Chinese-made movies, not Hollywood movies about China, from the last 10 or 15 years, you will see this car is quite popular in the streets. Now, every time is less and less popular because now they are becoming more than 20 or 25 years old, so some of them will start to be obsolete. I'm trying to follow the Volkswagen Santana. He's at a nice speed. You see him overtaking everyone using the right lane. And actually, exactly at this point, there was an accident in the way back, but not in this week, so in the next week. So I have the footage in the SD card. I may edit it later, but I'm not sure the accident is really visible in the camera because it's behind me, but not very far, like 2 or 3 cars behind me. The situation is that there was a traffic like now, more or less, so cars circulating at a bit less than 80 km per hour. And suddenly there is some retention in front. So cars are not totally stopped, but there is this wave that propagates backwards of cars braking. So I slammed on the brakes pretty hard, actually. The ABS kicked in. So I was braking at the limit. I was quite close to the car in front, but I didn't hit the car in front. And at that moment I was just praying and looking at the mirror so no one hits me from behind. So behind me, the car could brake, very close to me, but maybe at 1 or 2 meters. The car behind still could brake, and the third one could not. So he smashed the car in front. And I think maybe in the footage we can see something, so I will check it later. Okay, so we are out from the tunnel, and I'm very close to my destination. I will end this video here. Thank you everyone for watching. I hope you like my comments about Alfa Romeo and how they save themselves by launching an amazingly good car twice in the last 20 years. So see you in the next video. Bye.